it shrink, 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 shrink. Anytime you feel overwhelmed or detached, know that you can return to your breathing and this comforting scene. Now that we have taken the time to unwind and find comfort in the space we are in, let us begin. The fresh morning air had a chill in it that swept across the grassy, lush valley that Ammius was awakening in. Before he even opened his eyes, he could feel the richness of the environment around him. He could hear the Farron River, trailing just behind the woven canvas tent he was sleeping in, blended into the peaceful soundscape where the calls of birds as they stretched their wings in the morning sun. For a moment, Ammius lay there, soaking in the soothing atmosphere in bliss. At Lythian Castle, things were never this quiet, and before this long journey, he was rarely allowed to explore the outside world. He had been born a knight, and even more importantly, he had been born a member of the Lightwood family. The Lightwood family that had existed for hundreds of years for one purpose, and one purpose only: to protect the royal family at all costs. As a young boy, he was trained to do just that. And now, as a young man, he held that obligation near and dear to his heart. And that loyalty, that devotion to protecting the royal family, had led him to this tent by this winding river, with a beautiful woman sleeping soundly beside him. He glanced over at Astaria as subtly as he could. The princess was sound asleep, her head canted in his direction on a small stack of hay that served as a pillow. For a moment, Ammius felt as if he couldn't breathe. Astaria looked so beautiful, so peaceful. Her hands were neatly tucked underneath her chin, her body coiled into a tight, comfortable ball. Even in her sleep, she carried an air of grace and wisdom with her that lit up the room. This was only Ammius' second day with Astaria on this mission. He had been chosen specifically to join her as she journeyed across the land in search of a flower. Ammius wasn't certain what the flower was for exactly, but he knew it had to be incredibly important. Astaria wasn't permitted to leave the castle unless it was absolutely necessary. The most surprising thing, however, wasn't the fact that Astaria was leaving the castle. It was that she had chosen Ammius to be her companion. The two were the same age. They had been raised alongside each other, though they were reminded of their rankings and their roles. Astaria had always been kind to Ammius, though Ammius wasn't quite sure why. He was the quietest and most soft-spoken of all the knights. He didn't stand out like many of the others, and yet she picked him out of everyone else. And now, Ammius was the one waking up beside her, with a sworn duty to protect her, no matter what. He rose from the tent and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The mountains around him disappeared overhead into a thick layer of fog that was beginning to form, giving the whole valley a look of ethereal beauty. This far into the countryside, there were very few villages. It was a land of magical creatures and breathtaking scenery, far away from the eyes of society and the politics of the castle. For the first time in his life, Ammius was feeling what true freedom was. He wandered through the misty air toward the river with a lightness in his heart. It was a lazily moving river, winding aimlessly over a mosaic of colourful river rocks. There were neither rivers nor streams around the castle where he and Astaria had grown up, so the sound alone was enough to lull him into a state of complete and utter serenity. He slipped off his worn leather boots and took a step into the river. The cool water was refreshing and rejuvenating in a way that only nature can be. He closed his eyes, relishing in the gentle current of the water, the feel of the icy waves lapping against his calves, the smoothness of the rocks underneath his feet, rocks that had been worn down by this river for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Then there was a splash beside him. His eyes shot open, only to find Astaria smiling at him. A wool blanket draped loosely over her shoulders, shielding her from the morning mist. There was joy in her eyes. On this particularly damp and dreary day, it was as though she had brought the sunlight with her. Something, Ammius realized, she always seemed to do, whether she realized it or not. She was barefoot in the river beside him, looking down at the river in awe. I've never actually been in a river before. Have you, Ammius? She asked. Ammius's heart skipped a beat at the sound of his name coming from her lips. In the castle, she was only permitted to address him as Knight, and he was only permitted to address her as Princess. He wasn't used to this familiarity, and he wasn't quite used to Astaria acting so freely. Ammius told Astaria that he had never been in a river either. Bliss seemed to radiate from Astaria at his admission. Cheerfully, she told him that it was good they were experiencing it together, after being cooped up in the castle for so long. She tiptoed deeper into the river, with a swiftness that caught Ammius off guard. Astaria moved with grace, but that wasn't always a good thing when you were in charge of looking after her. Astaria bent down to look in the water around her, her eyes glistening with the pure joy of this first experience. For a moment, all Ammius could do was gaze at her. There was a childlike energy to Astaria, a girl who had been desperate to see the world, to marvel at all of its wonders. Yet, at the same time, she was a woman with immense power and wisdom. A woman that looked completely comfortable, sitting atop a gold throne, making decisions that would alter her kingdom forever. Ammius was so lost in thought, so wrapped up in admiring the enigma that was Astaria, that he didn't move fast enough to catch her before she slipped into the water. He waded to her side and plucked her out of the river. His arms coiled tightly around her, protectively holding her against his chest. "Are you all right?" he asked. But the only response he got was laughter. Astaria laughed in his arms, her chest rising and falling against his own. She wrapped her hands around the back of his neck to help steady herself. When she lifted her gaze to meet his, a warm feeling flooded Ammius's body. Her green eyes were playful now. her cheeks tinged with the slightest bit of red. "It seems I got a little overzealous," she muttered, through a small smile. In his arms, her heart began to race. At first, her hands landed on his chest, on the tight muscles that resided there. She moved them around the back of his neck to hide her embarrassment, to try and soften the rapid reddening of her cheeks. She felt safe with Ammius, and with that safety came freedom. Ammius had always been the quietest of all the knights. He wasn't one to shower her with compliments. He wasn't one to give her leery looks as she passed by, hoping she wouldn't notice. He was a man of devotion, a kind soul, and that wasn't the only reason she had picked him to come with her on this journey. Ammius helped Astaria to the edge of the river. Her royal gown was dripping wet now, clinging to her shivering body. She insisted that she could continue on, that her clothes would eventually dry. But Ammius knew better. "I took an oath to keep you safe, princess," he said gently, leading her back to the tent, "and I refuse to let you catch a cold out in the wilderness like this." Astaria couldn't help but smile. Ammius was, indeed, a rule follower, a man who took his oath seriously, and she was thankful for that. But she was rather surprised when Ammius reached into his own knitted rucksack and handed her one of his uniforms to put on. When Astaria stepped out of the tent in his uniform, Ammius had to shift his gaze to the ground. He had never seen the princess in anything except her royal gown, and yet here she stood, in a pair of black slacks and his black shirt, which hung loosely over her small frame. Even in such a simple uniform, she was stunning. And Astaria liked the outfit even more than Ammius liked seeing her in it. It was warmer than her gown, more comfortable, and it smelled of Ammius. It was the aroma of a bonfire and pine needles and fresh steaming bergamot tea. She had noticed the scent last night as they were falling asleep, and it brought her a sense of peace she didn't quite know existed. Out beyond the castle walls, Ammius was permitted to wear something rather untraditional as well. And, in the slivers of light peeking through the fog, he seemed to glow in it. He wore a loose, long-sleeve white shirt, which he had buttoned just below his collarbones. For the first time, Astaria was able to see a faded scar on the edge of his collarbone that travelled up the side of his cheek. No doubt a wound he had gotten protecting her in the not-so-distant past. His dark hair fell in thick curls around his cheeks and just over his vibrant blue eyes. Most often, his expression was neutral and emotionless. However, unlike the other guards, Ammius wasn't able to hide the emotion in his eyes. Regardless of his words, regardless of the absence of a smile on his face, his eyes betrayed him, telling Astaria just how he was feeling. And in that moment, as they gazed at each other far away from the castle walls, Astaria could see the admiration and the guilt that admiration caused. She felt her chest tense with a million things she wanted to say to Ammius, comforting things, true things, but now wasn't the time. She kindly thanked Ammius for the warm, dry clothes and they continued their journey through the beautifully untamed wilderness. Astaria took guidance from the ancient books that she held tightly against her chest at all times. Books with pages worn by age and obligation. Books that had been carried by her ancestors, many of whom were going on the same quest as she was all those years ago. Though she knew she wasn't going to find the Moondrop Flower today. It would be tomorrow, when they reached the waterfall, that she would finally have the flower. Most of the time, Ammius and Astaria walked in comfortable silence. Astaria would enthusiastically point out a magical creature or a stunning plant, and Ammius would politely smile and ask her questions about it. Astaria was a scholar, and it showed in her passion for understanding and appreciating the world around her. Often, Astaria would watch and admire Ammius as he walked ahead of her. She would listen to the sound of his surprisingly light footsteps, to the clink, 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 clink of his sword and shield as they tinged against one another with every step he took. But today was different. About an hour into their journey, they found themselves walking up a rather steep hill. They were rising up out of the flourishing valley onto a plateau that wasn't on any of their maps. Ammius insisted on walking first, protectively shielding Astaria as they rose up over the last few feet of the incline and found themselves in the most breathtaking meadow either of them had ever seen. In the mist, the meadow looked like it had been plucked out of one of their dreams. Stretching as far as the eye could see was a sea of wildflowers. It was like a watercolor painting, a mosaic of pinks and purples and blues and greens, all vibrantly popping against the haze of an impending storm. The entire meadow seemed to glow in a kind of spiritual beauty that surpassed anything either of them had seen before. In a dreamy haze, Astaria took Ammius's hand in hers. His cheeks flushed at her touch, and, for once, he didn't bother to hide it. He gazed at her, his eyes churning with the wonder and magic of the discovery they had just made, churning with the electricity of her touch. Astaria led him into the sea of wildflowers, which brushed against their ankles, filling the misty air with an aroma unlike any other. Breathing in the air was like tasting the sweet nectar of thousands of flowers that had yet to be named. Overwhelmed and inspired, Astaria pulled Ammius down into the flourishing meadow with her. They plopped down between a bed of purple and white flowers, sinking into the soft grass as though it was the most comfortable bed on earth. The flowers seemed to tower over them, wrapping them in a floral cocoon that somehow felt like home. The weight of expectations, of their titles, of their past, it all slipped away in that instant. They were simply two equal humans, breathing in this moment together, experiencing something pure, something that didn't seem possible in the world that had war, or princesses, or knights. Astaria lightly brushed her hands over the flowers above them, tracing her fingers along their dew-dropped petals. Ammius watched as she did so, without bothering to hide his admiration for her. He watched the way her eyes lit up when a tiny ladybug scuttled onto her fingertip. the way a thin smile formed on her lips as dew traced down the palm of her outstretched hand, reminding her that she too was part of this world of wonder and beauty. "Why can't we just do this?" Astaria asked. She turned her gaze to Ammius, whose face was only inches away from hers now. He didn't flinch as she neared him, like he normally would have. He was calm in this interaction, connected to her by the winsome experience they were sharing in this field of flowers. Quietly, he told her they had obligations to fulfill. But Astaria just smiled at him in a dreamy, reflective way. "But what do you want, Ammius?" she asked, her voice a mere whisper. No one had asked him the question before, and he had never thought about it, and yet an answer flowed out of him like it had been there the whole time. He told Astaria that he wanted to have a tiny cabin in the countryside, somewhere similar to this area. He would build it beside a river somewhere, where he could wade in the water whenever he pleased. He would work in peaceful harmony with the land around him. He would plant flowers and fruits and vegetables and grains. In the mornings, he would awaken and tend to his garden. By midday, he would relax under the loose tendrils of a willow tree with a good book. And he would read as he watched the sun lazily drift over the sky. He would eat fresh fruits and vegetables and listen to the sound of nature around him. He'd listen to the songs of the birds, the rustle of the blades of grass rubbing up against one another, the soothing bubble of the river as it went about its endless journey to the sea. At night, he would sit by a campfire and watch as the stars painted the inky black sky. When he finished telling Astaria his hopes for the future, he discovered her smiling, waiting intently for more. She was utterly transfixed. There was such passion in his eyes and such longing in his voice. In that moment, Astaria knew she would do anything she could to ensure that Ammius got exactly what he wanted, and she was delighted to discover that he wanted the same thing she did. Quietly, she told him her hopes for her future. She loved her kingdom and her people. She would never dream of abandoning them. Yet, she needed space to breathe. She needed to be in nature, to have a life where she could breathe clean air and experience living without the weight of politics. Almost every night, she had the same dream. She would walk through a meadow, much like this one, and would sit under the tendrils of a willow tree and read. She'd snack on cheese and fruit out of a small wicker basket. On sunny days, she would watch the butterflies and bumblebees as they meandered along, blissfully floating from flower to flower. On rainy days, she would hug the book against her chest and watch contently as the rain traced down the long leaves of the willow tree until they cascaded to the grass below. She longed for a cozy home away from it all, a home where she'd stoke the fire, a home where she'd cook the meals, a home where she could be without the eyes of society on her, a home that she could share with the man she loved. As the last sentence escaped her lips, her honesty seemed to get the best of her. She covered her mouth, her face tinged with pink. Ammius squeezed her hand gently, giving her silent assurance that speaking her truth was okay. In the castle, it was common knowledge that Astaria would not marry for love, but would instead marry to protect the kingdom and form a strong alliance. It was clear in that moment that Astaria had no intention of fulfilling those expectations. And as her gaze drifted up to meet Ammius's, the look brewing in her eyes told him who she was thinking of living her life with instead. He thought about drawing her lips against his. He thought about finally allowing those years of denying his feelings to melt away. But just as he was about to lean in and kiss her, rain began to cascade from the sky. Astaria leapt to her feet, her hair already becoming drenched by the sudden downpour. She took Ammius's hand in hers, pulling him along with her through the meadow of lush wildflowers. As the rain fell, the aroma of the flowers and the earth beneath their feet seemed to fill the air in the mist. It was intoxicating, invigorating. The two found themselves laughing as they helplessly traveled through the seemingly endless field of flowers, searching for refuge from the rain. Finally, they spotted it. Far in the distance was a swathe of willow trees, swaying in the stormy breeze. Astaria led Ammius through the curtain of tendrils. The tree towered high overhead, its gnarled ancient branches providing them with shelter from the storm. Outside, they could hear the melody of the rain tap, 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 tapping against the ground, and drip, 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 dripping over the leaves onto the mossy ground below. They both leaned against the tree trunk, their gaze fixed on the branches overhead. I suppose we'll have to wait out the storm here, Astaria mused. Ammius reached into his rucksack, pulling out a small book. It was a book of poems, something he carried with him to pass the time. Underneath the willow tendrils, with the rain falling all around them, Ammius read poetry to Astaria. Every poem seemed to be sweeter than the last. Every word seemed to be more sentimental. At one point, Astaria leaned her head on his shoulders and closed her eyes, savoring the cadence of his words that flowed in harmony with the falling rain. When he finally closed the book, Astaria laid her hand on his and softly asked, "Do you know why I requested you to be my guide?" It was a question Ammius had asked himself over and over, one that he could never quite find the answer for. She asked him if he remembered a stormy night in the castle, just like this, when they were younger. Astaria had gone against her parents' wishes and snuck down into the library to read well into the morning hours. It was a constant fight with her parents, and she was told if she stayed in the library overnight again, she wouldn't be permitted to visit any longer. The knights were ordered to tell her parents if she disobeyed. But that stormy night, Astaria fell asleep reading in the library. Ammius was the guard in charge of watching her. He worked for her parents, not for her. And yet, he picked her up. As quietly and as swiftly as he could, he carried Astaria all the way up to her chambers, an area where he wasn't permitted to go, and tucked her into bed. He brought her a glass of water, and even slipped the book she hadn't finished reading into her hands. Astaria woke up as he was slipping the book into her hands, and she saw him smile at her as he pulled the blankets up over her shoulders. That was a testament to his character. He wasn't blindly following rules. He was doing what he felt was right, and he was doing something that would make her happy, in spite of the risk it posed to himself. From that moment on, Astaria admitted that she had watched Ammius. She witnessed his kindness, his selflessness, his morals. She saw the way he did everything with absolute care and compassion, and she wanted to know him. Not know him as her knight, not know him as a man in the castle walls. She wanted to really know him. His dreams, his hopes. She wanted to escape with him, even if it was only for a few days. Ammius was touched. He too had wanted to know Astaria. He felt as though he had learned more about her in the past few hours than he had learned in years, and he found himself even more drawn to her than expected. Soon, night began to fall, with the rain still pouring just beyond the shelter of the willow trees. Ammius and Astaria worked together to put up a tent, their home for the night, a home they shared together. Ammius lit a small fire out of the firewood he carried on his back. They sat around the fire in content silence before Astaria finally asked, "Why did you agree to come with me on this journey?" Ammius opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. He couldn't possibly say what he wanted to. Could he? Astaria's hand found its way to his cheek. She rubbed her thumb over his soft skin, encouraging him to take the next step, encouraging him to speak his truth. And in a whisper, he told her the truth. The moment where he carried her to bed was the moment that he fell in love with her. He loved her dedication to knowledge, her passion for reading about life outside the castle walls. He loved that in spite of her title, she was a woman of kindness, a woman who treated everyone as equals. He loved that she would sneak off and come back from the woods covered in mud. He loved that she would put a finger to her lips, begging him to keep it secret. The words spilled out of him, overflowing with passion and honesty. But soon his list came to an abrupt stop. Astaria pressed her lips to his, pulling him into a gentle kiss. Her hands drifted through his hair, drawing the night closer to her. When she pulled away, she hovered inches from his lips, eyes wavering with relief and admiration. "I love you too," she murmured. They curled up in the tent as the storm raged outside their shelter. Astaria told him quietly that their quest would end tomorrow, by the waterfall on the far side of their kingdom. She was going to find the Moondrop Flower. She would return back to the castle, and with the flower in her grasp, she would take the throne as queen. Ammius held her closely. The reason for their quest had been hidden from him. This was a journey all princesses were required to take before they became queen. After this, she would take on a role of even more importance. But Astaria turned on her side and smiled up at him. "As queen, I will one day need a king, don't you think?" Ammius grinned, pulling Astaria closer against him. "I suppose one day you will need a king. Do you think that role is fit for a knight?" Astaria kissed his cheek and whispered, "I believe that role would be perfect for a knight." As the rain poured around them, they held one another. For now, they weren't in a castle. They weren't in a cozy home alongside the river with a lush garden. But to be home, all they needed was each other. They fell asleep with their fingers intertwined and their hearts beating in tandem, knowing that their journey together that the story of their love was only just beginning. I hope you've enjoyed this sleep story, and it has brought you a night of peaceful, restful sleep. Please join me again tomorrow night for another sleep story. Until then,